Did you know one of the most important leaders in the early church was actually a timid young man who didn't think he was ready? His name was Timothy. Timothy grew up in the city of Lystra. His mother, Eunice, and his grandmother, Lois, taught him the scriptures from the time he was a child. But there's an interesting detail about Timothy's background. The Bible tells us that while his mother was Jewish and a believer, his father was Greek. That meant Timothy grew up in a culturally mixed household. In the first century, that kind of background could place someone between two worlds, Jewish and Gentile. What might have seemed complicated about Timothy's upbringing actually became incredibly useful for God's purposes. It positioned him to understand both cultures and eventually become a bridge builder in the early church. Then, one day, the missionary Paul the Apostle came through Lystra during his travels. Paul noticed something special about Timothy. The believers in the region spoke highly of him, which suggests his character and faith were already evident. Paul invited Timothy to travel with him, and that moment changed Timothy's life. What started as a young man joining a mentor on a journey eventually turned into a lifetime of ministry. Timothy became one of Paul's closest companions. He helped strengthen churches, delivered messages between congregations, and assisted with the spread of the gospel across the Roman world. Eventually, Paul entrusted Timothy with leadership in the church at Ephesus. But here's what makes Timothy's story so relatable. He wasn't naturally bold or fearless. In fact, Paul's letters to Timothy suggest he sometimes struggled with confidence. That's why Paul wrote words that have encouraged believers for centuries. Don't let anyone despise your youth, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. 1 Timothy 4:12. Paul also reminded him that God had not given him a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and self-discipline. Those words reveal something important. Timothy wasn't a superhero of faith. He was a young man learning to trust God with responsibilities that probably felt bigger than himself. And that's exactly why Timothy's story matters today. Many people assume God only uses the naturally confident, the charismatic, or the highly experienced. But Timothy shows us something different. God often calls people who feel unqualified, people who are still growing, people who don't feel ready yet. Timothy didn't begin as a famous leader. He began as a faithful disciple, someone who learned the scriptures at home, walked alongside a mentor, and stayed faithful in the opportunities God placed in front of him. Over time, God shaped that faithful young man into a leader who helped guide the early church. So the lesson from Timothy's life is simple, but powerful. You don't have to feel ready for God to begin using your life. What matters most is sincere faith, a teachable spirit, and the willingness to take the next step God puts in front of you. Just like Timothy, the people God often uses most are not the ones who feel the most confident. They're the ones who are simply faithful and available.